Hello and welcome to this special report from ZenootTV. The subject, the publication of Make UK's annual UK Manufacturing Facts Card. That's a bit of a mouthful for you. This is the 2020 to 21 edition. It's an annual snapshot of where we are in our sector. And while we may be undergoing some pretty terrible times all told, I have to say there's some very solid news in here about the state of UK manufacturing. Welcome solid news, I should say. Let's start with the headlines. £191 billion of output, that's round about the same as it was last year, providing 2.7 million jobs, average wages 13% higher than the whole economy. That is such a great headline figure. Given that the manufacturing sector accounts for about 10-11% of the total GDP of the UK, amazing that we produce 53% of the country's total exports, massive amount of R&D, 16% of total business investment. Just talking about exports, if you look at that figure, the United States is by far our biggest customer. And yes, that would tend to lead people to say, well, let's focus on that. But then if you look at Germany and add in the Netherlands, France, Ireland, in other words, our EU trading partners, the EU remains by far the single biggest trading partner we have globally. To discuss these findings and to perhaps discuss some of the implications of them, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Phipson, Chief Executive of Make UK. Stephen, what stands out for you amongst these findings?
I think the overwhelming message, Nick, from the fact card this time round is the importance of the sector to the UK economy and some really interesting developments. The growth in exports that we're seeing there and the importance of the export part of it. More than 50% of the country's exports are manufactured goods. The importance of the EU remains solid and therefore the need to make sure we have a strong relationship with the EU going forwards. The growth in our exports to the United States, but also the quality of the jobs and the fact that we continue to provide jobs which are above average income for the sector, which is very strong. And we're also seeing these regional growths as well in different areas. It's particularly interesting to see the growth in London and the South East now. If we combine those two areas together, that now becomes the largest manufacturing region in the country, just overtaking the Northwest, which is on its own is the largest. But if we look at that combined area, that's grown substantially, and it's grown around electronics manufacturing, which we've become very, very strong at. So I think a really interesting, comprehensive set. It shows us still way up the league table in the top 10 of manufacturing countries in the world. So an important place in our economic development going forward. And I think this fact card really does underline those key messages, Nick.
Well, let's have a look at one or two of the individual items there. You've already mentioned exports and the importance of the United States as a growing market. Something over £50 billion worth goes to the US. It's the biggest single destination for the UK, in fact. But when compared with the EU, it becomes obvious where the balance of our interest really lies when it comes to exports. Is that not the case?
That is the case, and you have to bear in mind that within exports to the United States are largely complete products. They're finished goods largely. If you look at what we're doing there, a lot of complete products going over the Atlantic to the US, whereas in the European sense, it's a combination of things. And a large part of those exports are the integrated supply chain parts of our manufacturing, which are reliant on trade in both directions with our European partners. So a real complex mix of finished goods and supply chain components going backwards and forwards across the border there, whereas in the American sense, exporting to America is the classical export. So a much more integrated supply chain going on with the EU, and therefore accounting for a very much more significant part of our activity if you look at the numbers in the fact card.
I'm going to be touching back to the EU a little later in the discussion, but I just want to stick with the card. The average pay in manufacturing is 13% higher than the whole economy. Now, given the accepted imbalances in the education system, which really isn't geared to providing the flow of talent that we in the sector need, we really should be making more of this. I mean, manufacturing is a great place to work.
You know, it's a fantastic place to work. I mean, you rightly point out the issue about the average salaries being significantly higher than the national average, but it's a very, very sexy place to be if you're a youngster. We've got some very high technology. If you look at the automotive sector now, we've got more computing power in today's vehicles than you have on aircraft produced a few years ago. I mean, it's a really exciting place to be for digital engineers, for software engineers, for robotics, for all kinds of interesting new areas. So for youngsters coming in, you've got that great double benefit of a higher average salary and a really exciting place to work. If there's one failing, we don't shout loudly enough about it, Nick, and we need to. We need to continue to attract many more of our bright youngsters into this sector, and we've got to go out there and shout it from the rooftops.
Yeah, we really must make the case. It's a story that we can devote an entire program to and will in the future. But in the meantime, everybody in manufacturing, get out there and say 13% above average national pay. That's what you can get in manufacturing. Another impressive figure, I think, Stephen, is that R&D levels in manufacturing are very high. I mean, 65% of the entire R&D budget spend rather, comes from manufacturing. Now, okay, fair enough. It's a very technology intensive business, but that says a lot about what's happening in manufacturing, does it not?
It does. It's very, very high technology, as we know. We stay in this position in terms of global manufacturing by constant innovation. We have good support in many areas from government. There are other areas we can do to improve that. But if you just took aerospace and automotive as two subsectors that come out strongly here, then combined spend there on R&D is nearly £6 billion just for those two sectors alone. There's an enormous amount of investment being made into manufacturing. That continues on. That's a long-term story, Nick. That's been going on for some years and increasing. And again, it's really keeping us at the cutting edge of what needs to happen in terms of design and technology. And I think another good reason, back to your first point about why youngsters should be attracted in, because not only are we innovative and highly paid, but also we're investing in terms of the future in R&D, and that's absolutely vital to keep us at the forefront of the sector.
I'm going to pick you up just on that point, because while the R&D investment is very high, only 16% of total business investment comes from manufacturing. That feels slightly out of kilter. How do you account for that?
Well, again, if you look at the overall picture in terms of the country, if we look at other measures such as GDP, manufacturing is a relatively small part of the overall economy. 10 to 12% of GDP, employs 2.7 million out of the total workforce in the country. So again, around the 10-15% area. So we punch way above our weight in terms of contribution to exports, in terms of average salaries. But you've got to put it in context with the whole economy. And of course, largely the UK economy has been around finance and service type propositions. So we're very proud of what we've done in manufacturing, and it's growing, but it's a relatively smaller part of the economy overall in that context.
I just want to return to something you said earlier about one of the interesting facts that the fact card comes up with, which is that London and the South East, when combined, are actually higher, or they're the biggest single region in the country for manufacturing output. And everybody always, of course, points out to the Northwest and the sterling work they do there in the West Midlands and indeed throughout the country. Now, what does this tell you about the levelling up challenge that the government has? Because if we're seeing a lot of growth in the Southeast, surely the government wants to see more manufacturing growth and investment up in the north and in the southwest.
Absolutely right, Nick. It does bring it into sharp contrast, some of the challenges that has been highlighted by the government in terms of their levelling up agenda. There has been, as you say, traditionally a very strong manufacturing presence in the northwest, and if we just take that as an individual isolated area of the country, then that's still the single largest. But what we're saying here is if we combined the southeast and London together, we now find for the first time that combination is now our biggest sector, and it tends to be in the more electronic and software driven manufacturing areas. So you've got that kind of technology push which has been concentrated around London and the southeast, and part of the challenge is moving not away from traditional manufacturing but adding to that traditional manufacturing by some of these new software, new technology techniques we see being invested in the southeast. So that's part of the challenge around levelling up. I would say that one of the interesting ways of doing that of course, has been around the pilot for Made Smarter in digitising manufacturing, which, of course, with governments, that was actually done in the Northwest because that was the physical place where most of the manufacturing was taking place. And of course, that brings with it those digital tools. And if I was to shout out again and make another plea on this broadcast, it would be around smaller companies having a close look at those digital techniques. We need to be adopting those techniques widely across the country. The pilot's been very successful. We're pushing on a more national push now with government as to how we can get that out there. But it's about, again, levelling up. It's not just that software and technology needs to be centred in the southeast. Every manufacturer has the opportunity to take advantage of it, Nick.
The news broke earlier this week that the government is thinking of using domestic legislation to alter the EU withdrawal agreement. That is an international treaty. Now, many say that that has added extra gloom to the hopes of a free trade agreement with the EU. How confident are you that future editions of the Make UK annual manufacturing fact card will look quite so positive?
Well, we do need a proper deal with a comprehensive deal with the EU, and it's something that we have pushed very, very hard now for the last couple of years with the government, all the government administrations that we've been through and all the different flavours of those. We have been really pressing the case to make sure they understand the nature of integrated manufacturing, the importance of zero tariffs and free access across the borders, why it's critical to get a deal, the amount of effect it has, and you can see that in the data card in terms of the weight of exports that are dependent, imports and exports on this integrated supply chain challenge with the EU. The fact we've got very strong, long manufacturing ties there, and just the way it's integrated together, it's extremely difficult to envisage a world where we have a hard border and no agreement on many of the subsidiary issues which are critical to manufacturing, everything from equivalence in terms of things like the REACH directives, where we are with equivalence on standards and things like that, so that we can continue this very successful partnership of integrated manufacturing. And we've pushed that really, really hard with government. And I absolutely believe in talking to ministers today, even after those announcements, that the case is that they do understand how critical that is for our sector. And I rather hope that all the things we're seeing in the press are about posturing, and that's for government to judge whether that helps them in their case with negotiating a good deal with the EU. But I absolutely am firmly of the belief that we need to get a proper deal here. There's already challenges in place around us leaving the EU, and we need to minimise those going into next year.
Finally, Stephen, earlier this year, Make UK and Santander did a pretty comprehensive bit of research into the effect that the COVID-19 pandemic will have on UK manufacturing in the short and the long term. Agreed, this study was done around about May of this year. Now, the findings were pretty shocking. They were talk of gloom. They were pretty gloomy indeed. Do you have any confidence that the picture will change going forward, that manufacturing will be seen to have bounced back rather more than you anticipated then?
We continue to monitor this very closely, as you can imagine, with members, and we are constantly looking at this. It's a picture which is quite complex, Nick, and I think trying to put it in simple terms is often a challenge. But we have some sectors that have continued well throughout the lockdown. After that report was published, we can see things like food and drink, medical device manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, those areas. Defence is another good example, where they've continued a level of activity, maybe not 100%, in some cases more than 100%, but close to, and have coped with the transition towards COVID-safe working environments, which has been very, very important. And other sectors virtually at standstill, and I think automotive, widely reported, commercial aerospace, those sorts of sectors at standstill. One of the things that's been important is that 94% of manufacturers have stayed open during lockdown, again adopting government advice and government guidelines, although the economic activity in many of those has been very, very low. What we're seeing now, the government's schemes to support business, such as the job retention scheme, have been hugely welcomed and hugely successful in making sure we can retain many of those skilled jobs, whilst we saw demand very, very severely depressed in those sectors. We're starting to see some sectors now coming back quite well. We're starting to see other sectors where they're at 50% of their normal activity and not expecting a recovery for 12 months. And there are some sectors which we are particularly concerned about, and we are calling for additional support from government. Those areas would be automotive, where, as you know, we employ 800,000 people in the complete ecosystem in this country in the automotive manufacturing area, and they are facing not only a low demand but also technology changes. That's going to need more time before that comes back, so we need more support in that area. And of course, commercial aerospace, where we've seen an absolutely unprecedented and dramatic fall off in demand in commercial aerospace, and it's really important that we retain that highly skilled jobs, the innovation that's been invested there to make us one of the largest manufacturers of aerospace components and subsystems in the world as a country, and make sure we're there for the other end of this, which may be 2 or 3 years away. So how can the government intervene to support those sectors? So we're working very hard on those at the moment, but just to try and illustrate there, Nick, that it's quite a complicated picture. So we've got some areas that we do need to concentrate on providing continued support to, other areas which are coming back, but generally people are thinking now the recovery is going to take a good 12 months in those areas outside of automotive and commercial aerospace to get back to anything like we saw pre-lockdown.
Well, Stephen, thank you. And thank you to you and the team at Make UK for all you do to represent our sector's best interests. I know you'll do your best. Let's hope you have more than a willing ear at the other end of the conversation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for your time, Nick. Thank you.
This has been a ZenootTV Special Report. Thank you very much indeed for watching. We'll see you next time.